Christy Lee, hello.
Hey, Juliet, how are you going?
I'm well, thank you. Good to see you. How are you?
Yeah, good to see you too. I am going great. And we are discussing today one of my favorite topics to talk about,
Oh, yes, KPIs.
key performance indicators.
I love that it's one of your favorite topics. Most people just see it and sort of a white noise sets in, there's this sort of blah, blah, blah. Yes, so let's get into it. Tell us a little bit about what we should be doing with KPIs, because I think most people do avoid them. And
Absolutely.
if they do tackle them, it's sort of like, okay, that'll do. I'll just put a little bit in and that'll do.
Yeah.
So what should we be thinking about?
Look, for me, KPIs, key performance indicators, some people call them key success criteria. There's a few acronyms that get thrown around, but really they are ways that we measure someone's success in a position. That's how I see them. So you can have team-based KPIs and company-wide KPIs, but what we're really talking about today is individual position KPIs. And I think they are so valuable in actually giving us a very quick snapshot as to whether someone is successful in the role. And they also they inform the person in the role as well in terms of how they're tracking. If you've got the right KPIs in place, they know themselves how they're doing and when they need to correct course.
Yeah.
But without KPIs, they're kind of left flying a little blind as to, they might be doing all the tasks that you've delegated them, but are they effectively being successful in the role?
Yeah. Okay. So you put them in a position description.
I do love to see them in position descriptions, absolutely. And I also use them in the performance review framework. I've been talking a lot lately about my love for quarterly performance reviews at the moment, as opposed to the old school annual or even twice a year reviews. I just think it's so much more relevant and you can be very direct about what did we achieve last quarter and what are our goals or objectives or KPIs for the quarter ahead. So yes, definitely I love to see them in position descriptions. And I love to see two types of KPIs actually. One is specifically relevant to the tasks and the duties and the success of performing the role. But KPIs are equally important, I think, in terms of culture and values and behaviour, because you could be brilliant at the job, but if you're not doing the types of behaviour that we expect in our business, then there's going to be trouble and conflict and problems. But if you don't have any way to measure that in a KPI, it can be really challenging to put your finger on and actually manage.
I think that's a really interesting one. And I think this is the one people grapple with often and or just don't think to include. And yet so often the difficult conversations we're having with people are not about performance as such. It tends to be about behaviour.
Absolutely.
Doesn't it?
Yes. Yeah, and they are trickier to write, the behavioural-based KPIs and cultural-based KPIs. They're not as simple, absolutely, but they're important to at least work through and consider.
Totally, yes. I'm working with a team at the moment and we've been doing some difficult conversation practice and we keep coming back to, okay, they actually need to stop and decide on their values because they've never actually got to that. They've just gone like Topsy and done the job. And by defining their values, they can agree on the behaviours that are acceptable and not acceptable and start putting them into
and doing some work on that and really quantifying, as the leader, you get to set the values, but what does that actually mean? How does that translate day to day? That's the core of it.
It totally is. Yeah, absolutely. So tell me about KPIs. What do you think they need to have in order to be useful and effective?
The number one thing they need to have is to be measurable. Need to have some way to measure them. So when you're talking performance-based KPIs, you can use the SMART goal setting acronym as a framework to help you to craft them in a way that's measurable. Because if you use that framework, you're going to be specific, which is very important. What is it that we're trying to achieve here? So like we use an example, you might be looking at this person improving customer retention. Okay, so that's not very specific. Improve customer retention by 10%. We're a whole lot more specific. That becomes measurable because by 10%, there's a measurement compared to last quarter, whatever. Action, so you might have a particular action you're wanting them to take. through making weekly follow-up calls or something like that, a specific action that's going to help them to know that they're ticking that box.
Yeah.
It obviously has to be relevant and realistic and then time-bound. So improve customer retention by 10% over the next quarter through weekly follow-up calls.
Yes. Yeah, perfect.
Clear. But when we don't have that framework, that KPI might otherwise look like improved customer retention.
Yes, absolutely.
Mm.
It's so interesting, isn't it? Because I think, and when we're starting out with these things, I was working with a client years ago, and she asked me to come in to help with some goal setting and KPIs and things. And all of the goals said things like significantly increase or improve. Or, and so, I went through it and I was going, okay, so by how much? And what's it going to look like? What does improvement mean? And in the end, what she said is, I don't want to put numbers on it because then we'll be measured. They'll be able to measure performance.
Yes, exactly. That's the plan.
Yes. And it was really interesting. We didn't end up working together because she was so resistant to actually putting specific measures against things. And when you don't put specific measures, it's impossible, really, isn't it, to
totally
come back to them and use them in any meaningful way at all.
Yeah.
Like, what does improve mean? What does, what are these words which sound lovely?
Yes.
But become meaningless.
I know. I've been working with a legal firm recently on their KPIs, and they're a legal firm that is funded to provide really specific support in a niche area. So they're not doing billable hours like most legal firms. So for them, KPIs have been really hard work to get their head around because unlike most professional practices where you're expected to bill 85% of your time and have 6-minute timing, like all these measurable things, they don't have any of that. And so it's been a really hard journey for them to sort of get their head around how to not have that kind of practice, but still have something measurable for their staff.
Measure performance, yes. That is tricky. Tell me, in your experience, when you're talking about KPIs, behavioural KPIs, what sort of things do you see?
Yeah, we see this play out in a couple of different ways. And this really comes back to what you mentioned earlier, and that's getting clear about what behaviours we want to accept and encourage and what behaviours we don't want to tolerate. And when you're clear about that, it becomes a whole lot easier to write these KPIs. But I guess some examples you might want to use there are around, let's say you have a value that you want to add value to every customer you interact with. And you've spoken about behaviours being that you're going to proactively refer articles of interest to customers that would help them in their business, hypothetically. Maybe you're an accounting firm or something. So your KPI in that case would be to value add to each customer at least once per month by sharing relevant industry articles or podcasts or whatever it looks like for you. Or another example might be, let's say you support the disability sector, and part of that means connecting with other suppliers so that you can provide the best advice to your customers. And so your KPI might be to attend at least one industry-run networking event a month to understand what the current trends are and the best products in the market are so that you can provide the best advice. So the measurable part is attending that one event a month or sending each client that one article a month. But it's tied into the value that is providing the best support to your disability clients or adding value to your business clients.
Yeah. And I think setting those sorts of KPIs really require conversations, don't they?
Absolutely. Yes. Because what does that look like? It's very easy to say, let's add value to our clients. That's important to us.
Yeah.
But what does that actually look like? What does adding value to your clients look like? Because it'll be very different for every business.
Yes. And I think that's the sort of thing that when you actually talk with the team about it, they'll have some real ideas about how they can add value.
Oh, totally. Yeah, this is a conversation to be having with all of your team. And I remember when I had my consultancy practice, we used to do this as part of our team planning every year, that we would sit down and we had some core values that were always there. And then each year we'd have some focus values that we sort of threw in the mix. And we would workshop it and say, well, what does that mean? And it would mean sometimes different things for each role in the business. What it meant for some consultants is very different to others. But we made agreements in that meeting about, okay, that's how I'm going to show up. That's how you're going to show up in that way. And they didn't take ownership over it as well because it's been their idea.
Yes, exactly. Yes. I think that's a really interesting one. And, when I work with teams on behaviours, we talk about behaviours that are above and below the line.
Yeah.
you know, I think it really helps them hold one another accountable when they're delivering on those, doesn't it? Even before you get to the KPIs.
Definitely. And I think when you've got common language like that in a business, it also helps to embed in that tribe mentality, and everyone wants to feel like they belong.
Yes.
And when you can use that language, whatever it is for your business, I've got a client that definitely uses above and below the line, and their team will say, you're being below the line to their colleagues and to the owners if they need to, because they've created that environment.
Yeah. And I think that's incredibly powerful.
You
know,
of course.
It really does. It really helps people at every level feel like they have the power and the authority to sort of say, actually, this is what we agreed, you know,
yes,
not doing what we agreed.
Yes. And it actually beds in a much stronger culture when you can do that, because things don't get slippery.
Yeah.
People start to really own the behaviours that you've discussed, and that's what creates a strong culture.
Yes, absolutely.
Mm.
Fantastic. So if you were going to say sort of 3 or 4 things to think about when you're developing strong, measurable KPIs, what would they be?
I'd say you need to think about what success looks like for the role and get really clear on that yourself before you even start to craft them. And that might require some thinking on your part, but I think it's really important. Yeah. How can you measure that success? And how can you engage your team in coming on board with these KPIs?
Yeah, I think they're great points. And I think this is the thing. I think we often think as leaders, we have to do it all. But engaging the team is such a critical part of this, isn't it? Oh,
absolutely. And, you know, you might get your team involved. If you're using KPIs in the performance review structure, you're having the discussion right then and there. And one of the things I recommend in that structure is you have the team member come to the meeting with 3 goals or objectives or KPIs that they want to work on in the next quarter. Yeah. And then you discuss them and you put them in place. So they're coming to that meeting with that intel, and you're layering what you need in the role on top of that. It's going to work pretty well.
I think so. And I think if we can think in that way, rather than thinking, I've got to lock myself away and work out everybody's KPIs and then go and sort of dump them on them, instead, you know, and then I've got to enforce them. You know, and it all becomes this really heavy, hard work thing.
And it's why it doesn't happen.
Exactly. So so just easier if we just kind of we'll skip that this quarter.
Yeah.
Have a conversation.
And the next quarter and the next quarter. That's right.
Yes. And we'll talk broadly about what we need to achieve.
Yeah. And you can start small. Start by just getting 3 KPIs in place for each role and working on it with the individual employees. It doesn't have to, you don't need 10 KPIs. You can start with a few. And for some roles, that's all you ever need. Yeah. Fantastic. Brilliant. Thank you. It's a good chat, the KPI one, isn't it? It is, absolutely. And this, it really is one of those ones that I think we do avoid. But if we can get in there and get it right, I think it just helps us so much to drive the value we want. Yeah. You know, and it also just empowers our people, because they can say, look, I've achieved this, and actually I want to strive for a bit more. Yeah. You know, I want to push that envelope out a bit and challenge myself. So, and it gives them clarity about what we're expecting from them, which they actually really want. Of course, yeah, everybody wants that. Yeah. So if you've got listeners, if you've got questions about KPIs or ideas from yourself about KPIs, jump over to our Facebook page. There'll be a link in the show notes, and let us know how you feel about KPIs, because it is a hot topic. It's a very hot topic, yes. And whether you've had success with them. Absolutely. And other tips. Yes, perfect. Thanks, Christy Lee. Lovely to talk. Thanks, Juliet. Talk to you next time. Okay, bye. Bye.